Josh Fenton, CEO and co-founder, and welcome to Friday edition. We've got the chair of the Political Science Department down at the University of Virginia, Jennifer Lawless. Professor, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, how are you?
We are good. It is a steamy Friday here in Rhode Island. Air quality alerts and heat alerts and you name it. The overall Earth is not doing so well this summer, but let's jump over to other things that aren't doing so well right now. Sabina Matos's press conference last Friday, we haven't had a chance to talk about it. You did give comment that night, which we published. You've had a week to think about it. What's your overall feeling about how she performed and took on the issues? Very significant charges that potentially her campaign was involved with a fraud.
I don't think the press conference helped her in any way, shape, or form. And I say that completely believing that she had no idea what was going on. You know, I don't think, and it doesn't seem like there's any evidence to suggest that this was some orchestrated attempt on the part of the Matos campaign with Sabina Matos at the head, you know, saying, let's try and skip the line and just get some fraudulent signatures so that we can get on the ballot and move this thing along. That said, I've always believed that, you know, the candidate is the person whose name is on the signs, and that's the person who's ultimately responsible. And during that press conference, she didn't take responsibility. She blamed other people. And in the week following the press conference, she hasn't taken responsibility. And as far as I know, nobody on her campaign staff who's paid by her has either. And there have been no consequences. Nobody's been terminated. Nobody has resigned. And it just looks like they're hoping that this is going to go away. And I don't think it's going to go away.
Yeah, so let's set the stage right now. She is on the ballot, and it looks like she will stay on the ballot, almost regardless if there was an indictment handed down against her campaign or against this woman, Holly McLaren, who was a paid consultant, although the explanation of that relationship is murky at best. You know, are we in this new era? You know, we can blame it on Donald Trump, we can blame it on others, in which nobody takes responsibility for anything. We wrote an editorial sort of juxtaposing with sort of the historical nature of Harry S. Truman, who had a placard on his desk that says, "The buck stops here." By the way, that was not the dollar buck stops here, and the responsibility for the issue. You know, is that the new era of American politics?
I hope not. I think that there are some high-profile people who have obviously adopted that sentiment and have adopted that manner of operating. Donald Trump is among them, for sure. He's probably the leader. But what doesn't really make sense is that the American people have always been very forgiving when somebody apologizes or acknowledges wrongdoing. Where they are less likely to be forgiving is when somebody lies to them or is unwilling to admit that a mistake was made. And, you know, Bill Clinton is the perfect example of this. Once he admitted that he lied and said that he did, in fact, have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky, his poll numbers went up, right? Like, people were willing to say, okay, he told me the truth, we're going to move on. Now, again, I don't think that Sabina Matos is lying about anything, but this is a case where going forward to Rhode Island voters and saying, look, mistakes were made, balls were dropped, it's my fault, and here are the things that I'm doing to ensure that nothing like this happens again, would likely go a long way. Now, it's possible that this other method of just hoping it goes away works as well, but that's not as tested.
You saw it, I saw it. I thought it was cringeworthy. I thought it was consultant malpractice that you'd even put her in that position of sort of, you know, throwing the, I felt like throwing the bloody fish out into the water. With all the shark reporters, and there was a room full of reporters, and the reporters did what reporters do, which is ask tough questions, and she stood there and poorly answered all of them for, you know, 40 minutes. It went on way too long, not to the press's benefit or her benefit. It was just sort of chaotic, and then this interchange with an attorney to the campaign or campaign manager. No answer made sense. Does it really underscore the chaos of her and her campaign? Listen, I understand mistakes happen, but then you got to clean it up, and she should have been in charge. She should have started the campaign, said, listen, I'm gonna answer your questions for the next 20 minutes, And if I need some expertise, we'll follow up and we'll get you backup questions. Let's go to it and let's answer some questions.
Yeah, that's what I would have done. And I would underscore that none of the questions asked by any of the reporters was something that she would not have been able to anticipate. They were tough questions, and they were in a lot of ways broader than the one incident that she was holding the press conference for, but nothing was a real stumper. There was nothing there where she should have been like, oh my God, I can't believe that somebody's asking that. We're totally caught off guard. So the fact that the fact that the campaign called the press conference, put her out there, and then it turned into the debacle that it was, I do think speaks to, if not chaos, just a level of incompetence among somebody on the campaign who's making major decisions.
So on Monday or Tuesday night, I had dinner with Phil Rivers, who was Senator John Chafee's chief of staff for many years and considered probably one of the smartest political minds in Rhode Island in the past 50 years. And he and I, over dinner, scratched our head about how none of these other campaigns have jumped on this issue. I mean, if I were running against Sabina Matos, I might just take clips of her answering questions and run those as 30-second commercials. Why aren't these other candidates underscoring the chaos, the lack of authenticity, the lack of honesty in which the Sabina Matos campaign have demonstrated?
I think that some of it has to do with the fact that she tried to preempt that by basically saying that if my opponents use this against me and go negative, it's just, for their own political gain, and it's everything that we don't like about politics. Like, it was clear that she was trying to create disincentives for those campaigns to do it. That said, I'm floored that none of them, has taken the bait.
But if I'm running a campaign, I don't care what she says.
Look, I feel the same way. That said, I was a little bit surprised. So, I saw Aaron Regenberg got endorsements from Bernie Sanders and Jamie Raskin, and those are two really, really big endorsements and speak to the fact that he's really the candidate. He's portraying himself as, the most progressive in the race, the candidate that is really out there for working families. All of that is well and good, but it's kind of strange that that's what he's touting right now, and it's not in some way coupled with an argument that he's also ready to go to Washington and solve problems because he's so competent and he's so experienced and he has, his campaign has been flawless. Or there's just a way to sort of even indirectly juxtapose yourself to what has gone on in the Matos campaign. And it doesn't seem like the other candidates are doing it. Instead, they're touting endorsements, which are, important, but certainly probably not going to, affect the outcome of the race.
Listen, I would say on average we get 5 endorsement emails from the campaigns on a daily basis. We rarely publish them. I mean, I get it, but the local of the auto union here in Rhode Island that has 27 members. I mean, I'm just not sure that's really news. Isn't the news really who's got the best character to serve Rhode Island in Washington? And Matos, the clear frontrunner before last week's disasters, has now raised serious questions about whether or not she's the right person to represent the state.
I think that's right, but I also think that the other candidates have not run campaigns that allow them to portray themselves as the obvious alternative. So there was not a very, very clear second choice. And as a result, first of all, they're blowing the opportunity because they're not, they're not highlighting that. But second, they're not really differentiating themselves from one another in a way that will be obvious to voters who aren't paying much attention.
So Don Carlson's campaign, he's a former House staffer, worked for Joe Kennedy in the House back in the 90s, went on to a career. He's a lawyer, went on to a career, made a bunch of money in the energy industry, wealthy, lives in Jamestown. His campaign's the one that brought this to light in many ways and filed the initial complaint against the Matos campaign. You've got a lot of money. You've already walked out down the pier on this one. Why wouldn't you keep going and say, hey, listen, this is exactly what we don't want in Washington. I'm the one who blew the whistle on this. This is exactly what you do want in Washington.
Right, except I think he's trying to walk and chew gum at the same time and isn't succeeding in either, because I think it seems like what his goal was to get her knocked off the ballot. Right? It's a lot
Yeah.
easier to win a race when the front runner is no longer in the race. I'm not convinced that they had part two of this plan ready to go because we haven't seen anything in the last week.
Yeah, no, gosh darn nothing. We did get a press release that they are the biggest spenders on TV. That's always an important moniker of nothing, absolutely nothing.
Especially when that's self-funded.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean,
Right. So, where's this race right now? What should we be looking for? We're awaiting the state police and the attorney general. This attorney general is not the fastest attorney general. I can't imagine that he's not going to come to some conclusion before the primary. I think it would be an outrage if they don't have some resolution as to this woman's activities and potentially others' activities, and whether or not there was some level of fraud on this. Where is this campaign right now?
Well, one thing to keep in mind is that the Attorney General said quite clearly that he's not equipped to and has no plans to validate every signature.
Right.
So even if this woman is found guilty or is indicted for, fraud, that unlikely will extend beyond her. In terms of the campaign, I've said all along, in a crowded race, if you're the front runner, you have a very substantial benefit. And I think that even if this turned a lot of people off to Sabina Matos, because there are so many people in the race and because there isn't this obvious next choice, there's another tier of candidates, I think she will still likely win. And the other candidates that come in second, third, fourth, and fifth will maybe have 12 or 13% of the vote as opposed to 8% of the vote, but it's not going to matter.
Incredible.
But I do think this speaks to the fact that this is somebody who will be quite vulnerable next time around. And I wouldn't be surprised if candidates start announcing their intentions to run for Congress in 2024, as soon as the special election concludes.
You mean we could have a bigger crowd than the 15 or so that
I don't know that it would be a bigger crowd, but my hunch is that some people who decided to sit it out because the incumbent lieutenant governor was running will be less inclined to sit it out.
Okay, let's jump over to the federal news. A lot of news in just the last few hours related to Donald Trump. The biggest news came about relating to functionally additional indictments tied to the alleged misuse of documents by the president, taking them in an illegal manner, taking top secret documents, showing top secret documents. The special prosecutor has now added to the list of headaches for the president. Give us a little overview of sort of where that case is now and what we can expect just on this one, this Mar-a-Lago documents case.
The new charges that were added yesterday add a degree of concern for the Trump campaign, I would assume, because they speak directly to a cover-up and orders to destroy evidence or hide evidence. And the Mar-a-Lago employee or Trump employee who who's now also being indicted looks like he's probably well situated to flip, because this is not somebody who's very well positioned to defend himself on this front. And so, I think this is an example of Donald Trump trying to outdo Richard Nixon in Watergate. Like, he learned absolutely nothing from it. He learned nothing that the cover-up is worse than the crime. And now we're hearing more about the cover-up. This also speaks to, I think, Donald Trump's sort of mental state at the time. He was fully aware of what he was doing. And this is not only in terms of waving around a document that he then came back and said, oh, that wasn't a document, it was just something. No, it actually was. And people were told to destroy things and move things. So it's hard to imagine how there are not very serious consequences regarding this. And it's also unclear that there won't be additional charges in the documents case.
And it appears that in the narrative of the new charging documents, that there is an employee of Mar-a-Lago tied to the security system in the storage of those security tapes, who has clearly participated and assisted the federal government in this prosecution.
Yes, and I think that there's also somebody who is now being indicted alongside Trump, who has every intention to flip and give the government even more information about the security footage, the security system, the storage, and destruction or moving of documents.
Okay, so that's Mar-a-Lago. Let's go to January 6th. We expect the special prosecutor to hand down significant new charges, completely unrelated to Mar-a-Lago, tied to the January 6th events, and that's ready to go. I think many people in the media with firsthand knowledge expected it to happen this week, and now looks like maybe next week. Trump attorneys met with the special prosecutor on the January 6th event, and what do we know? Is it next week? What's the time frame?
They didn't call me.
Okay.
I mean,
it wasn't on your daily talking points from the Biden White House? Was it on that sheet?
Things on their mind. They've had other things on their mind.
Well, by the way, we'll get to that one in a minute.
I think that next week is likely. I don't think it's impossible that we're even, that this afternoon is a possibility. The last step in this process is typically to speak with and to give the person who's going to be indicted a chance to, make a statement. Donald Trump's obviously not going to go before the grand jury, but it's likely that the meeting with his lawyers played that sort of role to just get a little bit of clarity and understand expectations. So I would not be surprised if an indictment is imminent. I do think that the fact that it's been delayed a couple of weeks beyond when Donald Trump received that target letter suggests that Donald Trump might be the boy who cried wolf. And when he in the future announces that, oh my gosh, I'm being indicted, because he's going to be indicted again in Georgia, I'm not sure that everybody's going to assume that what he's saying is exactly right or that he has the exact timeline.
Okay, let's go to Hunter Biden. Do you think the number one thing coming out of Joe Biden's mouth these days is, Hunter? For the Republicans, I mean, here's multiple indictments against the front-running Republican candidate, Donald Trump, the former president, and the Democrats are stuck with Hunter Biden, who can't seem to get out of his own way. Let's give us a refresh on where Hunter Biden's situation is right now and what the next steps are to that case.
First, let's talk about false equivalencies. I mean, the frontrunner for the Republican nomination has now been indicted. If you take into account the New York charges and the Mar-a-Lago charges and what is likely to come for January 6th, even setting aside Georgia, you're talking about literally more than like 100 charges. And this is apparently the same as Hunter Biden having received a plea deal that a judge now did not accept.
Didn't reject, but didn't accept.
Right. Didn't accept, and so as a result, while the government and Hunter Biden's lawyers and legal team are going back and forth, in the meantime, Hunter Biden wound up pleading not guilty to charges that he was willing to plead guilty to if the plea deal went through. So the Republicans are obviously going to tout this and are touting this as evidence that Hunter Biden had initially received special treatment that's completely different from the treatment that Donald Trump has received, even though, again, what we're talking about are, I can't even say apples to oranges because they're not both kinds of fruit. I mean, they're on totally different planes. But this did give the Republicans, I think, a lifeline to continue to make their argument that there are these two systems of justice. And that's not something the Biden administration wants to deal with. And every day that the administration is not talking about the economic recovery, is not talking about the consequences of Dobbs and overturning Roe v. Wade, is not talking about the legislative achievements that the Biden administration have been able to put forward, is a day that they're losing. And given their record and given everything that they can run on, this is not something that the campaign is happy about.
So if I'm Joe Biden, do I have my son in and say, suck it up, Buttercup, for the sake of the Republic, you've got some serious charges against you, including a gun charge, okay? Put the IRS and the taxes aside, which are generally misdemeanors, generally not criminally charged. But on the gun charge, which would be, listen, you've got to go to trial or you've got to plea out and spend 6 months in Club Fed. I mean, it's bigger than you, Hunter. Not a guy that's been well known for taking personal responsibility over his errors in the past either.
I mean, I think he could have just stopped at "Suck It Up, Buttercup," right? Like that's
Yeah.
just get the T-shirt. Um, Look, I mean, so in real life, sure. But I do think that there's this political dynamic playing a role here, which is one that if you're going to talk about fundamental unfairness, I mean, if Hunter Biden was not Hunter Biden, this plea agreement probably would have been accepted with nobody batting an eyelash. But because he is, and because there was speculation that maybe it was a sweetheart deal, he came under additional scrutiny. I seem to, from everything that I've seen, from everything that I've read, from the interactions that I've, been able to glean, it seems to me like Joe Biden really does draw a distinction between his political career and his family. And I would find it hard to believe that he would encourage his son to do something that he didn't think was the right thing to do simply to save his political campaign. You can bet, though, that everybody else in Biden's campaign is pushing that argument.
Do they send the talking points via email? Is it old school fax? Do you have a fax machine there,
IV,
and it comes,
IV.
and you have to flatten it out like the old curved glossy paper?
The paper, like the ink is a little bit shiny and it gets a
Yeah,
little.
that's right, like a mimeograph machine almost.
Ditto. Purple.
Let's jump over to the elderly state of the United States Senate. Mitch McConnell, it was horrifying, painful, agonizing. I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican, watching Mitch McConnell stand there in the most painful way for 23 seconds. Listen, we all have our mental lapses from time to time, but this was excruciating, and it certainly appeared by what medical doctors who have expertise have mentioned that this was some type of mini stroke or something else that took place. Dianne Feinstein, Democrat, keep it bipartisan, in committee yesterday, clearly had no clue what the committee was on. She didn't know the vote was up. She didn't know how to vote. Her staff had to functionally vote for her. We've got these, 80, 90, 100, nearly 100-year-old members of the United States Senate. Listen, we're no rookies here. Sheldon Whitehouse is 67. Jack Reed is in his mid-70s. Is the Senate as an institution, all those things that were fine in 1942 of having a room full of elder statesmen in 1942, now with AI and science being such a critical part and technology being a critical part of decision making for the future of the country, does there need to be a real move towards a younger, more dynamic United States Senate?
I'd say two things. The first is that it's possible to be 80 or 90 or 96 and have your full cognitive abilities and be able to, do your job. And it's also possible to be 55 and have no idea what's going on, no idea what AI is, no idea how to talk about technology. So right off the bat, I do think that there's, it's important to differentiate among people and not just draw some line at age. That said, I also think that this is not something that's new. I think that what's new is, and new the last 20 years, the 24-hour news cycle and instantaneous video footage of everything raises these concerns. I wouldn't be surprised if in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, there were elder statesmen in there who also had absolutely no idea what was going on. It was just that the American public didn't see it the same way that they see this, and these clips didn't go viral the way that they do now. But I do think that the party leadership within both parties in the Senate and the House to some degree as well really needs to take a hard look and encourage members who are no longer able to do the job for a variety of reasons, advanced age perhaps being among them, to step down, and to step down before it's too late, to step down when there can be an election and a replacement and you don't basically have a congressional staff doing your job for you for a year or a year and a half.
Listen, I worked in the Senate for two different members in the 80s, one a Democrat, one a Republican, and saw elderly members of the Senate have lapses. But these are very dynamic, and sure, but we did have cameras back then. I mean, sure, you had to shake out the Polaroid and things like that, but there were cameras there. These are unbelievable examples, certainly in the case of Mitch McConnell, quite scary, disturbing for anybody who saw it. And then on the flip side, Dianne Feinstein, this isn't her first rodeo. This is now one of 10 or 15 episodes in which she seems just not cognitively capable of serving
Right,
as the
which
United
is why I think it's important to look at each specific case, because in both of these cases, there have also been relatively recent examples of what looked to be illnesses that went unexplained. So we know that Mitch McConnell had, was out for more than a month. He fell, he was hospitalized. We didn't really get a full accounting of what happened. He then came back, but there were a lot of unanswered questions. With Dianne Feinstein, she apparently had shingles, it developed into a major infection. She was gone for several months, came back and seemed not ready to come back, but it was necessary because the Democrats needed the vote. These are two examples where there obviously is a history and a past that should be taken into account. If another member of the Senate was standing at a podium and had that moment, and it wasn't part of a pattern, and it just seemed totally, strange and odd, I would probably be more inclined to say, well, let's see what's going on there. Here, I think that it's incumbent upon both the McConnell's office and Feinstein's office to say enough is enough.
Was that call that just came in, was that from the White House or was that from Dianne Feinstein's office?
Oh, it was Biden direct.
Don't give up the ship, Jennifer. Don't give up the ship. Does the United States Senate need like the NFL, like an independent doctor who says, you're concussed, you're out, you can't play anymore? I mean,
so what's really interesting about this is that, a lot of people say this is why we need term limits, but we do have term limits every 2 years, or in the Senate every 6 years, and they're called elections. And when Dianne Feinstein was reelected 4.5 years ago, there were already questions, yet she was reelected. When Mitch McConnell was reelected, people already thought he was quite old, yet he was reelected. Chuck Grassley from Iowa is 89. He was just reelected. So
yeah, but Chuck Grassley can do more push-ups than all of us combined. Like, he's still like running his farm in Iowa.
Although a little bit slower in committees, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But the reality is that voters need to have choices. Electoral competition is a good thing. And although there are many, many incumbents who get reelected because they deserve to be reelected and they're doing a great job for their constituents, there are many who get reelected because people are leery to run against incumbents, especially in primaries, and because incumbents have such an advantage in terms of fundraising and access to the media that it makes it very difficult for a challenger to gain traction. And I think that these are the kinds of examples where we begin to see that, not taking that risk and not taking on an incumbent before it's too late can lead to issues. And we look at Dianne Feinstein's seat. I mean, she's already announced that she's not seeking re-election. It's a very, very crowded field. And several high-profile members of the House of Representatives have already thrown their hats into the ring. People who would not have thrown their hats into the ring had they had to compete against Feinstein, despite her recent performance. So I do think that we need some fundamental, re-incentivizing of candidates. But I'm not sure that, a rule or an independent doctor coming in is the way to go.
Okay, what should people be looking for, both here in Rhode Island in this highly contested congressional race? What should they be looking for in the political landscape and the legal political landscape of the presidential campaign?
Well, in Rhode Island, what I would say is if another week goes by and none of the candidates who are running against Sabina Matos really try to make this an issue, we should assume that the issue is dead, and that the race is basically reset back to where it was prior to what's been going on. And that's quite stunning to me. At the national level, Donald Trump's numbers continue to remain quite solid, and the other candidates seem to be falling apart. Ron DeSantis, the narrative out there about Ron DeSantis is that he's tried to reboot and hasn't been able to. He's doubling down on, incredibly racist educational policies, and it doesn't seem to be helping. So, it looks to me like the Republican primary, and there will be the first debate shortly. We don't know if Donald Trump is going to compete or not, but that the Republican primary field is not really going anywhere either. So in a lot of ways, there are similarities in that there are tons of candidates, but nobody seems to be able to gain traction other than the front runners in both contests.
Jennifer Lawless, Chair of the Political Science Department at the University of Virginia. As always, we greatly appreciate you taking the time and your insights and your direct relationship to the Biden White House, as we like to say. For everybody else, stay tuned. For everybody else, stay tuned. If you haven't seen the story, there is a profile of one of the most recent victims of gun violence in Rhode Island. A former member of the United States Army, saw tours in both Iraq and Afghanistan, was a healthcare professional working for the state of Rhode Island, and was shot and killed, died tragically of his head wounds this week. I think it's an important read. If you get a chance, please do so. Everybody else, enjoy this weather, stay safe, and stay healthy during this time.